I'm Alan Plunkett. I own a company called Phoenix Staff, and we've been doing these banding together webinars for, I want to say it's pretty close to 10 or 11 weeks. I need to get that exact number, but we've been doing these for a while, and the feedback has been very positive on some of the things that we've talked about and some of the things that we've explored while everyone is navigating these very different waters than we've ever seen before. So this morning I have three individuals who have kindly accepted the invitation to join us on banding together this morning. And we have Julie Jones, Kyle Johnson, and Kara Hawking.
Okay.
And if I could have each of you introduce yourselves and a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the reason that we put this particular one together and hopefully continue to add value to people's worlds. So Julie, do you want to start?
Sure. So thanks for the introduction, Alan. I'm Julie Jones. I've been in the tech industry for a little over 20 years now. My background is in marketing and strategy. I've held a variety of marketing and strategy roles with well-known local tech companies. And most recently was in my role as Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer for a little over 2 years, and decided after some great accomplishments to take some personal time off and really explore my next career opportunity, having had the chance to work for both publicly traded as well as privately owned companies. I'm fortunate that my job wasn't impacted by COVID, but I am, as Alan already mentioned, I am actually in the middle of my search right now as I pursue my next leadership role in a marketing and strategy capacity.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Julie, for being here. And I know you're going to have some encouraging words for people as they're in a similar situation to you. Kyle, can you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so my name is Kyle Johnson. I had close to 13 or 14 years experience in the oil and gas industry, and with the combination of some other issues going on oil and gas plus the destruction of demand with COVID, I've had to make a decision to pursue other industries. So I've been reading Who Moved My Cheese a lot because my cheese was moved, and so I've been returned to school prior to all this to go get a master's in industrial engineering. Started back in the oil and gas industry just in time for the fallout. So I had searched from end of March until just a few weeks ago, where I was offered a position with Boeing in the aerospace and defense industry. So it was a little bit uncomfortable trying to figure out how to communicate transferable skills, kind of a whole new lingo, and helping people understand the skill sets and abilities that I bring to the table. And so, and Alan has helped me out a lot with that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Kyle, and thanks again for being here. I'm grateful for that. And then finally, Kara, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So my name is Kara Hawking. I have worked in mostly marketing writing for about the last 10 years. I was in online higher education, and then about 5 years ago, they eliminated their marketing team, and that's when I found myself at Exos, writing again for the marketing team, kind of finding a little bit of a niche in the editing side of it. And that Exos is a human performance company, and so they were hit really hard by COVID-19, does a lot of like fitness center management type stuff. And I worked specifically on a lot of the employer communications. So wherever there were fitness centers in employee locations, I was writing, educational collateral things for those programs. And so with all the offices closed, I mean, you can imagine they didn't really need much of that.
Yeah.
So I was put on actually unpaid leave at the beginning of May. And then majority of our marketing team was laid off on May 20th. So I had actually started looking when I was put on unpaid leave. And I was lucky enough to find a spot that I actually applied to on the day that we were laid off. It happened actually pretty quickly, and I started yesterday. So I'm grateful for it. I think it was a good turn of events for me, actually. But yeah, unfortunate for everyone else too.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on day 2 of your new gig. That's awesome. So I am curious, and I'd like to just kind of go around the horn. We'll start with you, Kara. It sounds like you landed very quickly, so I don't know that this particular question would translate well, but how robust do you feel your network was when you needed your network?
Honestly, I hadn't been, I think I told you this in our messages, I hadn't been that active on LinkedIn before I needed a job. And then when I needed one, I upgraded to premium and it like kind of exploded a little bit more. I can thank Dan for that, who referred me to you. But I think that outside of LinkedIn, I mean, we were lucky to work with a group of people that all really cared about each other. It was more like a family. And so my boss actually set up meetings with those of us that were all laid off at the same time. And we spoke and helped each other find leads, things like that. So that really helped me. I guess my advice on that would be like, if you find yourself in a situation where you're being laid off, or if you've already been laid off from a previous job, reach out to your old boss or reach out to the other people that were in the same situation with you and see if you can have like a happy hour together, see if they know of anything. Ask them to write you recommendations on LinkedIn, write a recommendation letter, anything like that. Reach out to those people that you know have had a good experience working with you, because I did that right away.
Such great advice, such great advice. And I'm curious, Kara, how did that like manifest itself? Were you guys like automatically helping one another, or was it people reaching out saying, Kara, how can I help you specifically? Or you reaching out saying, how can I help you specifically, versus asking for the help, but offering the help first?
Well, my boss originally invited everyone to the first meeting. We all jumped in. It was actually later the afternoon. We were all laid off in the morning. We all met later that afternoon. We were all that were on the call were on the marketing team. So we all already knew each other. I think there were 13 of us. And so it was really people offering, but if I found a role that I felt like someone that I knew could really fit in, I emailed or messaged them directly and let them know my sister is a vice president of enrollment locally here, and there's a bunch of jobs, and you know, if you need to get an interview, you can always put her name, just let me know, things like that. But actually Dan is the one that's been the most proactive, I would say. He's always reaching out, sending links to jobs, asking if there's anything that he can do to help. He had a contact at Deloitte, I think it was, that was going to help with resumes and things like that. I'm a writer, so I didn't need that kind of help, but of course others on the team were not. So
Right.
He's been the most proactive, I would say.
Nice. Very good. So Julie, same question. You left your job in December, so prior to COVID, and you're still looking. How would you say in November, how robust was your network, and what have you done since, you know, that period of time to beef it up if you've needed to?
Sure. So much like Kara, I did join LinkedIn Premium as well. With my background and the level of responsibilities I've had here in the Valley, I'm fortunate to have a very strong, robust network. You know, when I think about people that have been on my team, people I've worked with, to Kara's earlier point, staying in touch with my previous bosses. So I feel like I definitely have had a very strong network that has been there to help me. When COVID hit, I think that's when there was a little bit of a switch from a network perspective, and that I was very sensitive to the fact that they were all employed dealing with much higher priorities than helping Julie find a job. So when I would engage with my network, first and foremost, always checking in with them as individuals. Hey, how's it going? How is your work or your company or your office been impacted? And then having something specific in mind to discuss with them or to ask them, because in my mind, I was using their time, and their time could be used for other things. And although they want to help me, I made sure that I stayed focused on asking them for something specific or discussing something specific, so that it wasn't just, hey, do you have a job for me? Like, hey, me again, I'm still looking for a job.
Yeah.
And that constructive approach has really helped me even expand my network even more.
Nice. Excellent. And then Kyle, I mean, you were referred to me directly to help, which, you know, it was awesome, because I certainly love, and people know I love growing my network. But how much of that did you do? How much of that did you go out and seek out, and how easy did you find it, given that you had so much time in one industry?
Yeah, so that's so I had a very strong network within the oil and gas industry, and I'll be honest, throughout those years I probably took that for granted, and only considered pretty much that professional network, you know. And so when I first became available, it's kind of like, well, we're all falling right now, so we can't really exactly help each other up. And that's when it kind of came to my attention, like, okay, it's time for me to, I guess, grow my network horizontally now instead of so much vertically. And so that's when I started reaching out to people that I was in graduate school with, and that's how I got in touch with you, and some other contacts with, and so I was a referral for Boeing through, it was actually an oil and gas contact, but his father worked for Boeing, but then like the Raytheon contacts, when I was in talks with them, you know, that came through one of my professors from graduate school. So I definitely would encourage anybody, whether they're looking or not, to just always, yes, build that network vertically within your industry, but always kind of have feelers out there. You just never know if an entire industry creators. So I've been able to grow the network, but it definitely took a conscious, proactive effort on my part.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, I tell people all the time that, you know, when CIOs reach out to me, or, you know, any executive reach out and says, man, I didn't see this coming. And none of us saw this coming. You know, none of us could have predicted what we're experiencing right now. And it's so critical to keep that network established and growing and cultivate it. But it's hard for a lot of people to do. And I just encourage people to, you know, figure out what is right for you, to keep that going. I am curious, during the interview process, and Kara, I don't know how many interviews you had, but, you know, pipe in if this question does strike a chord with you. During the interview process, have any of you, and Julie, are you currently getting constructive feedback? I'm very curious about that, because that's something that I hear all the time being a recruiter, is that I only get, we chose somebody else, and I never get anything constructive. Did any of you experience during your interviews constructive feedback?
I did not.
No.
Okay. So all universally, the three of you did not get any.
I mean, it's like, Alan, it's like what you said, you know, most of them, you know, and sometimes it's not even over the phone, like a verbal conversation. You spend at least 30 minutes, an hour of your time for an interview, and you get a canned email saying, sorry, we chose somebody else. That's difficult sometimes.
Yeah. No, it's so unhelpful. Now, did any of you, when you got that, if you know, that's also the same for you and Kyle, Kara, did you respond and say, can you tell me why? I mean, I'm guessing you all probably did, and then it'd just go into a vacuum.
So like with Raytheon, I got deep with them. I got into the second round, and I specifically, you know, because he said, you know, if there's anything I can do for you, and I'll pass your resume throughout our company and things like that. So I felt like maybe he would be receptive. So I replied and just said, hey, it would be very helpful, you know, and I asked for some constructive feedback, and then I never heard back again. So that would have been helpful, and I felt like, you know, I get the canned email type situation if you're, you know, relatively early on in the process. But once, you know, you've gone through, you know, an email initial screening, a first round interview, a second round interview, we spent a lot of time together. I think, you know, it would be it would be helpful if we could get a little bit more feedback. You know, I think I still learn from it on my own, discussing with people like you and others. But yeah, constructive feedback would have been helpful.
Yeah. Well, and you make an excellent point. I mean, I think it's, you know, when you're that far in the process, I mean, the submission of the resume you don't necessarily need to know, you don't bring this, this, and this. I mean, you probably know that when you looked at the job description that you didn't have, certain skills, but you get deep into the process, you're owed that feedback, in my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I didn't really experience anything like that. I had a first interview, and they were seemed like they were slow playing the whole thing, kind of maybe that they had posted the job, but weren't sure if they wanted to really hire someone immediately after this COVID stuff hit. And so it felt more like, to me, they wanted to schedule a second interview, but it would be a couple weeks out. And, I just couldn't wait. Yeah. So for me, I just was like, well, I can't wait that long. So.
Right. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I want to encourage the participants, please ask questions, use the chat function, use the Q&A function. If you have any questions for our panelists, please jump in and ask them. And Kyle, you didn't mention this, but did you also upgrade to LinkedIn Premium? Not that they're a sponsor of our webinar, by the way, but maybe we can get them to. Who knows?
That's funny. I actually did. Yes, I did.
Okay. That's interesting. So you guys, all three of you guys did that. That's an interesting, just little point. What did that cost? I mean, I'm not even sure what that costs, and I don't know if it's different for everybody.
I think they have different levels of premium, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's different levels, and you get like so long for free, and then mine was $29 a month.
Yeah, it's like 30. Yeah.
Okay. I need to remember to cancel that. Just kidding.
I mean, Al, I know we were joking about them not being a sponsor, but I honestly think so far one of the most helpful things has been the ability to send mail or an email to individuals that you don't know, right? So you do your research, you find out who the hiring manager is, and you can send them directly your cover letter or personal introduction. Although to Kara's point, it's a low cost, I make sure that I think you get like 15 credits a month, I want to say. So 15 emails to strangers a month. And that's by far one of the most valuable pieces of the membership, at least for me so far.
Okay. So that brings up another interesting topic. So Kyle, you mentioned that you were very good within the oil and gas industry. You had a good network vertically, but you needed to grow it horizontally. Kara, I know, your industry, and you're still in like a sister, of your industry, right? I mean, or it's not the exact same, but it's relatively close.
Yeah, it's the National Academy of Sports Medicine. So they do, or I guess we do training, online training or in-person training for certified personal trainers, that kind of stuff. Okay.
And Julie, you crossed a lot of industries with your background. You're looking for VP of marketing or chief marketing officer, but how do you target who you reach out to? When you guys were upgrading to LinkedIn Premium, and when you were trying to figure out who do I introduce myself to that might be the most helpful or might be the most interested in what I have to do, is it safe, Kara, to assume you reached out to people within the Exos industry?
I personally didn't stay within it because, like, on purpose. I ended up within it, but that wasn't really my goal. I really looked for, first of all, something that had the option to be remote or at least partially remote. And then I looked for something that had to do kind of mixing. I had higher education experience. My degree is in education, and I'm actually almost done with a degree in teaching and learning with technology, a master's degree. So I was thinking if I could get in, I kind of expanded my pool, if you will. If I ended up in, health and wellness, that was great. If I ended up in higher education, online education, because I know that that's a growing industry right now.
Right.
From my sister's experience, that was great, but I didn't limit myself to just my industry.
Okay. And what about you, Julie? How are you targeting the people that you're reaching out to with your in-mails or LinkedIn emails?
Yep. So similar to Kara, not targeting exclusively or only within the tech industry. Yes, that's a big piece of my background, but I actually created a target list of companies to go after, both here in Arizona as well as outside of Arizona. I made that list based off of just, I'll say research, right? Who are the recognized companies for culture and some of the other, I'll say communication, public relations that are out there that explain what these companies do. And for me, it was about finding, Kara and I have a lot of similarities here. For me, it was about taking my technology experience and finding a company that is using technology to disrupt or transform or grow their respective industry. And when I say that, that's healthcare, that's finance, right? That's a lot of other industries right now. And so that's the approach I've been taking to reach individuals outside of my network currently.
Should unmute myself first. Kyle, what about yourself? I mean, you said that you were looking horizontally. Were you targeting people who had also transitioned from oil and gas to another industry?
I did some of that, and then also whenever I would see job titles where I was applying for, I would look for within that company or similar companies, similar job titles. You know, if I'm applying for an industrial engineer 2 role, okay, if I can find it within the same company, same role, or at a competitor of that company, just to kind of, because for me, it was a kind of a brave new world of a new industry. So I was trying to look for, okay, what are the types of skills that are highly emphasized for these type of roles, to learn more about what was being looked for. So it's not as much for reaching out to hiring managers, things like that. It was more to just for my research purposes and learning what they were looking for. So kind of look for potential new colleagues, or, you know, at least people that would be in similar type roles.
Okay. And did you reach out to them with the intention of saying, how can you help me? Like, how did you craft that introduction of yourself to them?
Right. You know, I was pretty transparent that yes, you know, I am looking for help, and that if there's down the road anything I can do to help them out. I was surprisingly, people were pretty receptive with that transparency, that, hey, you know, I at this time I'm just asking for help, and you don't know me, and I'm just straight up asking for a favor and help. And I definitely would recommend, though, you know, documenting and remembering who helped you out, and to, you know, try to figure out what you can do down the line to help them as well. But yeah, I was pretty transparent about, you know, anything you can offer is helpful. Any information, or, you know, I had a few people that offered let me have phone calls with them, kind of discuss company culture of Boeing, things like that.
Nice. Very good. And then just real quick numbers around the horn. Julie, how many emails, how many of those LinkedIn emails would you say you send?
I get 15 a month, and I probably am sending upwards of maybe 10.
Okay.
So I'm not even using the full 15 yet, but I, to Kyle's point, track everything, right? I track who I talk to. I track how many emails I sent, how many jobs I've applied to, because this is a journey, and whether it's an email or a phone call, you're going to look back on that, and it's going to have added value and helped in some way.
Yeah. Roughly the same number, Kyle, for you? Is that how many you were sending?
Probably 4 or 5 a month, probably.
Really? Okay.
Right.
And what about you, Kara?
I was probably around the same. Something unique. I don't know if anyone on the call works in the creative fields, but since I'm a writer, something that they always ask for is like a portfolio. Yep. And so I did build my own portfolio on Wix, and I had to make it password protected, unfortunately, because a lot of the stuff I did at Exos was for partners, and they don't want that stuff public. But when sending those email messages, I did include the link to that and the password to it, and saying, hey, you know, most of my experience is in marketing or email drip campaigns or whatever. Take a look at my portfolio and let me know if you have questions or anything, contract opportunities, anything.
Nice. That's awesome. Would the three of you be willing at all for me to post just kind of your introduction of yourself? Like if after this call, could you send me just kind of the way in which you crafted that message? Because I know people struggle with that. How do I introduce myself? How do I go about, you know, sharing who I am and what I'm looking for from them without seeming pushy or without seeming too, you know, I guess just pushy.
And Alan, I'm happy to help. Obviously, Kara's a writer, but I want to say, to give credit where credit's due, it was Forbes, and it was about 3 months ago. They published an article that came up on LinkedIn, and it was actually email templates. And it was there, and I can send them to you. I saved them in a Word doc.
Nice.
But it's like 5 different templates. Like, what do you write to a recruiter that hasn't followed up with you? What do you write, like we're talking about right now, an email template to write to somebody you don't know. You don't know me, you don't know my experience, but here's why I'm reaching out to you. And I'm happy to share that they're in an ugly Word doc, but I'm happy to share those with you, Alan.
I'll make it
And
pretty.
you can, yeah.
I'll give you credit. I'll give Forbes credit, and I'll make it pretty. That's all good. I'll reach out to Kara to help me make it pretty. Okay, I have a couple more questions, and Greg, I'll ask you if that answered your question. I tried to put Greg's question into the last question I asked, but that actually came from him as far as how many emails you guys are.
Hey, Alan, I saw Greg's question. You don't want premium for business unless you're in a sales role. I made the mistake of signing up for that one, and we're on this right now, so I can't look at it. I want to say premium for business was like $59 a month, and that's if you own a business. So you want the other one that Kara and I were talking about, the one that's like $30 a month. There's 2 different ones. That's what he was asking. I saw that.
Perfect. You knew the answer that he was looking for. Excellent. And keep those questions coming, folks, please. So I have another question that comes up all the time as well. During the interview process, do you feel as though you are being interviewed for what you have done, or is there an equal amount of what you can do for that company that comes out during the interviews that you guys have been a part of? Is it only your past, or are they geared as much toward what you're capable of doing for the organization once you join the organization?
I'll go first. I think for me, it was more about, like, let's say it was an hour-long interview. About 10 minutes was, oh, your work history and who are you and whatever. And then after that, it was about, 30 minutes of here's who we are and what we want in someone and how can you fulfill that for us. And then the last part was, okay, do you have any questions for us? And I always had prepared questions, like, and not just canned questions that I would ask any employer. I mean, some of them end up being the same, but specific questions after going on and researching the company, after looking up, things in the news that I've seen about their company, just specific, and making sure that they're pointed and specific to that company.
Nice. Did you have any panel interviews, Kara, just to kind of pull that thread a little bit?
So actually for the job that I ended up getting, it was supposed to be a panel interview, but instead I did 3 consecutive 30-minute interviews.
Okay.
But it seemed like they had questions, and I could ask them now, actually. It seemed like they had worked together to create questions that kind of built off each other so they could go back and talk to each other and compare.
Nice. And were you asking the same questions of those 3, or were you crafting different questions for each?
I made different questions simply because I knew the titles of the people that I was going to be interviewing with. So one of them was an instructional designer. One of them was a content development and production manager. And actually the second one was also that same title, who ended up being my boss. And so I knew that an instructional designer, just from my own experience, has a different role to play than someone who's like producing this stuff, someone who's pulling in different, like basically managing the whole process.
Right. So
for me, I had different questions, but kind of along the same lines. For me, it was really important that I need the flexibility because I'm a mom and my husband has an inflexible work schedule. So I did address that with all 3 of them. And I also addressed, return to office, things like that.
Okay. Very good. And then Kyle, I have to believe that they focused more on, you know, what you could do for them because you're transitioning. I mean, you're getting out of the industry that you were in and the role that you were in. But did they do that, or?
Surprisingly, you know, so like Boeing, they do the STAR interview, behavior based, and so it was almost exclusively, you know, you know, what have I done, and you know, and so with your advice, I was really able to, you know, two-piece that type answer. The question was just what have I done, but I answered it in terms of, okay, so if it was tell us about a time that you solved a technical problem, okay, well, I'd give them that example, but then I also would match that up with the job post and description of how, you know, that could apply into that role. So I could kind of marry the two. But yeah, the questions, and even Raytheon, I'd say probably 80% of the questions were still driven towards what have I done, not as much about what can I do for them, which was surprising, I think, initially. And I don't know if that's maybe because they're technical roles that they just want to know that you know, can expound on your experience, you know, solving technical problems or what, but it was definitely not as much as I expected on the what can you do for us type questions.
Okay. And I'm not going to guess, Julie, but what about you? What has your experience been?
Like Kyle said, definitely behavioral based questions. Like Kara's experience, most of my interviews, you know, I can't think of an interview that hasn't started out with tell me about yourself. And I basically have, you know, a 2 to 3 minute note to myself that I customize for each interview to say, okay, based off of this role, here's some things I want to highlight in my introduction. But I give a quick 2 to 3 minute overview of my experience. It usually answers some of their questions that they have for me that day. And so we can move on to other questions that I think help them on their own figure out what I can do without me having to say, well, this is what I can do for you.
Okay. Interesting. And so we have another question here that you guys can read, but I'll read it for everyone. Did all of you go through in-person interviews, or have you all gone through in-person interviews? And if so, were masks mandatory? This individual had one like that. It was extremely difficult to read people and express myself with masks. Would it be beneficial to request a Zoom interview in this type of situation? And, you know, have you guys experienced that?
I had none that were in person. I'm actually kind of surprised that they're still doing in person. I guess if it's an essential job and you're going to be going into the office anyway, then they would, you know, do that, set that expectation from the beginning is my guess. But I don't know. I just think back to Grey's Anatomy, who watches it and emotion with your eyes, you know? You know, I talk with my hands a lot. I've been very good. I've been like sitting on them. So maybe if I were in an interview with a mask, you know, that would help a little bit. I don't know. That's a good question though.
I guess like when I think of that, Alan, I think of it's not any different than a phone interview, right? You can't read somebody over the phone. It's hard to read somebody over the phone. To Kara's point, it's easy if you can at least see their eyes, or easier. I have not had any in-person interviews since March, and I've probably interviewed with about 5 different companies, and everything has been phone and Zoom.
Yeah. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, unfortunately, exclusively on phone interviews, and I think that was if I learned a lot between the first I'm sorry. Anyway, between different companies on phone interviews, whenever we had a specific portion of that talk when y'all did the one on common questions in interviews, and we had some time where we specifically talked about phone interviews, and that was helpful a lot to me because, you know, one of the biggest takeaways I learned from that was to learn to be comfortable with silences, because it's a lot of times I would think, you know, I'd answer the question, I'd hear that silence, and then you think, you panic and think, okay, maybe I didn't answer the question adequately, and then you go rambling. Well, it turns out that, you know, it's a panel style interview. They're all in different locations. They're not exactly sure who's going to ask the next question, or maybe they're taking notes, or so learn to be comfortable with silences, which is, it's a very odd situation though, to answer a question and then just sit there.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah, I tell people that all the time. I mean, that's great advice, Kyle, because it's tough. You know, you're on a phone interview and people can't see one another, or even if you're wearing a mask, I think a Zoom is certainly the preference. And my recommendation to the person that asked that question, I would definitely request, if you can, to do it via Zoom, because it's going to be tough to get the inflection points or, get the body language that you need if you're wearing a mask. So I would request it. I've been a part, doing what I do for a living. I've been a part of several that have, we've walked people in and we've all been wearing masks, and they're just odd. They just are. It's tough. So a big question that I have for you all, is how do you stay encouraged? Like, you've all had difficult scenarios happen, where I don't think any of you other than Julie knew that you were leaving your job, but then none of us knew what was going to hit us in late February, early March. How do you stay upbeat? How do you stay positive? What is it that you found to be the way to just get up every morning and continue to drive and push towards that goal of, landing that opportunity? And Kyle, if I could start with you on that one.
Right. So I think, early on in the process, I'd fail into the trap of comparison. I would see, other people that were still, because early on I was still looking for oil and gas jobs, and those were very difficult to get whenever everybody's losing jobs. And I fell in the trap of comparison, looking at, John Doe's still working, man, that guy's a clown, or, things like that. And that's under the assumption that the system's perfect, but then unfortunately I also, colleagues that I respect that I would place as even, better candidates than me that also were out of work. And that kind of finally woke me up like, hey, this is nothing personal. It's just the situation we're in. And so to stop playing that game of comparison. And so that was the first step, just to realize, hey, this isn't a knock on you personally, your character, your abilities. And so once I was able to get past that, to me, it was encouraging. Like, okay, now let's going forward. How are we going to do this? And I think I alluded to earlier, but stay organized. That helped me a lot. And writing down, started off every day with, okay, what are 5 positive things I'm going to do today that are going to help me move forward in my career pursuits. It's either going to be working on the resume, reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, job searches, talk to somebody for interview tips. Every day I'd wake up and the first thing in the morning, I'd write down 5 things positive I was going to accomplish that day. Because I think a lot of where it got to the point where I needed that sense of accomplishment, because for a while there, you feel like your wheels are just spinning. You're just in that, a hamster in a wheel. And so by physically writing down, these are the 5 things I'm going to do today, and I'd check them off at the end of the day, even if I didn't make any, maybe didn't feel to make a whole lot of progress, I at least accomplished those things and got that sense of accomplishment. I think that kind of got me out of my funk.
Nice. I love that. What about you, Kara?
So for me, it was kind of double duty for me. So it was the shock of losing the job, and then it was also, I have 2 kids, and so I was home with them, and I love my children and I love being a mom, but I am not cut out to be a stay-at-home mom. So I was getting used to that. But for me, it was about, and I learned this from my dad, who was laid off from Heinz when he turned 60 after 30 years. He is saying, would always tell me, treat looking for a job like it's your job. So instead of I would find myself just searching posts, searching Indeed, searching LinkedIn, searching any job board that you can think of, like hours upon hours, finding things. And it was just exhausting. And so he said, you know what, make your schedule. You go into work, when you have a job, you get up at a certain time, you shower, you do this, you get the kids ready, whatever. Block off time for job searching, block off time for, writing customized cover letters, block off time for doing certain tasks that help you achieve getting a job. Treat it like it is your job. And that really, really helped me. And when you combine that with the mom duties, of, you know, being at home with, she'll be 2 in September, and then I've got a 5-year-old who's playing Spider-Man right now. Combining that with them, you know, having planned activities. So it was, instead of my normal hour lunch that I would take at work, it was a 2-hour lunch, and we would swim if it was warm enough, and we would do certain things. Now it's way too hot, but we would walk to the park. So I've got an Outlook calendar up right now. That's my work one, but it looked the same when I didn't have a job. Once I got out of my little mourning process, you know, I was bitter for a while, and I was talking to everyone still there for a while. I did all that too, but having a schedule really helped me.
Nice. Julie, what is your plan? What is your strategy on staying encouraged?
So when you asked the question, I had a big smile because I think it's the most common question I get asked recently. And again, similar to Kara, having a routine. So getting myself mentally in a game that searching for a job doesn't need to be a full-time job, right? So I don't spend 8 hours a day looking for my next career. But within that time, scheduling, right? So I sort of a little bit like Kyle, sort of checking the boxes or making my list, right? So every single day, spend a little bit of time on my network, reaching out to my network, a little bit of time with recruiters, reaching out to recruiters, doing company research, and then online time. So those were like the 4 elements of my routine every day. And I'm usually done, you know, around lunchtime, a little bit thereafter. And on a day where I don't have any meetings or interviews or anything, it's giving myself permission to do whatever it is I want to do. If I want to take a nap, if I want to binge watch Netflix, you know, you have to take time away. Right now, my husband and I are planning a really fun road trip. It's not a full-time job to look for your next job. You don't want it to be. You'll get burned out. Like Kara said, I caught myself a few times spending way too much time online. That's not very rewarding, not very fulfilling. And so I've just found my motivation and my happiness in sticking to my routine and then giving myself some free time.
Nice. No, that's huge. And I like everything that you guys said is, I mean, those are all things that I hear people who successfully get across the finish line do, you know, from the writing down the 5 things to scheduling to making sure you know who's helped you along the way. And just referencing back real quick, Kara, to what you were saying about, you know, you guys formed a collective of people who got laid off. I think that's huge too. And that's often missed, you know, often people miss that and don't see that as a golden opportunity. But if you're helping lift everyone up and trying to help people get through this together, it's another way to encourage yourself and encourage them to get through it. How do you avoid the negative? I mean, we have so much negative in our world. So that's one way that you guys focus on the positive and focus on the encouraging. But what do you do to mute, you know, what's going on in the world today? Or are you able to mute what's going on in the world today?
So
Go ahead, Julie.
So 2 things. Number one, as far as what's going on in the world today, I have made a conscious decision to watch significantly less news. I maybe watch the news 2 or 3 times a week at most. And then I'll say more directed at this job search situation, the negativity, you know, getting a no email, a canned email, getting a no thank you. The best advice, Alan, that I got a long time ago, when you start to think negative or doubt yourself or get frustrated, would you let somebody talk to a loved one that way, right? Would you let somebody talk to your spouse, friend, family member that way? No. So when I get down, if I do have a bad day, hey, it's not yet. It's not no, it's not yet. And I'm not going to let myself have any negative talk because I wouldn't let somebody talk to a loved one that way. That's sort of my mental game that I have going.
I like it. Now, do you count those as a win as well, Julie? I mean, when you're like pursuing an opportunity and suddenly they say, not yet, do you count that as a win? Do you say that was success because now I can remove them from the list and focus elsewhere?
So I think, I'm laughing because I think just about everybody, I don't know that you could count as a win when you open up your mailbox and I know what the email looks like by now. And there's days where you're like, gee, thanks. But in the right state of mind, yes. And the reason you count that as a win is because that was someone trying to tell you that that opportunity wasn't right for you anyways. That wasn't meant to be. And how it was told to you that it wasn't meant to be, leave that aside and move on. That's a win. And that just means there's something better ahead.
Nice. What about yourself, Kyle? How do you mute all the noise that's going on right now?
That's tough. Honestly, it just, I think, like Julie said, you consciously, limit the news and the social media. And then the other thing, I'm a numbers guy. And so I know, I don't know what percentage I'm gonna land interviews, but I know the activity is activity. And so, you hate to get the rejection email, especially if it's one you've been deep in the process, but I just, know that, okay, well, that just puts me that much closer to a yes eventually. Now, especially the ones, if I had any kind of contact at all, at least the phone screen, initial interview, things like that, I could always count them as a win because those were practice. I hadn't interviewed since 2006. So and still to this day, would not consider myself a good interviewer. But so the practice was because I think each time I interviewed, I did feel like it went a little bit better. So I did consider them a win because it was just another opportunity to get better.
That's great. What about yourself, Kara?
I will echo Julie and Kyle saying that I kind of limit how much news I watch. And actually, I haven't really just limited it, I've kind of pivoted it. So instead of watching like a national news network, I watch the local, news network in the morning just to get more local, just to get more they have more little kind of feel good stories in the morning. Yeah. I feel like, oh, someone saved a dog, And so, that's always nice to see. I completely quit Facebook, which I had been on since it was deployed. Actually, Kyle, I went to Texas A&M, so gig 'em. And so I had been on Facebook since I think 2005, and I quit. And so I think for me, that was a big one. And not just because there was negative stuff on it about everything that you can think of, but more because it became like this addiction where you just had to figure out what other people were doing all the time. And you saw that so-and-so, went somewhere or got a job or did this, and it like reinforced that you didn't have it yet. And so I feel like that helped me the most. But really, I'm kind of lame and I don't go out and do anything anyway. So for me being at home, it was an adjustment, but it wasn't too bad.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think that morning period that you're talking about is where people sometimes sit for a little too long. And I don't know the right time frame for that, but I know it's usually longer than any of us want it to be. And that's part of that morning process is, like you had said, Kyle, comparing, and there's no reason to do that. So it's interesting that you guys all said you're trying to push it away as best you can, because I think that's a key component of finding a job, is not having as much encouragement and positivity as you can, but also intentionally removing anything that takes away from that or subtracts from it. So that is really all I had for you guys today. We're ending a little early, so I will ask if anyone has any other questions to please ask them. But do you guys have any parting thoughts for the folks that are here, or any parting thoughts for those that are going to watch it down the road? And again, before we do that, I can't thank you guys enough for sharing your time with us. I really appreciate it. And it was great to meet you, Kara. Glad Dan's a great dude. We're going to have Dan on here in a couple weeks, or maybe next week.
Good. I would just kind of remind people that, it's kind of like Julie was saying, if you didn't get a call back, or if you didn't get, to the next level, or even get a response at all, which I found, that wasn't the one for you. And it is discouraging, but when I was looking for a job and I finally found Exos, I was unemployed for 6 months and had an 8-month-old baby. And so, and I ended up at Exos where I'm sad that I left, but I gained those those friends, those coworkers, that network, and that experience that I got to learn so much from. So it took a longer time then, but it was the right one.
I would say a little bit to what Kyle said earlier, but I say this myself every day, focus on what you can control, right? I can't worry about what that recruiter thought. I can't worry about what my former employer did or said. None of that helps. And by the way, when you do that, you're wasting your energy on that. So I ask myself every day, how am I using my energy on things that I can control? Because those are the outcomes where I can make a difference. And those are the activities and the actions I focus on each day.
Perfect.
And last, I just add, you know, hey, just keep grinding, you know, embrace the grind, enjoy the process. You know, it's, you know, there's the fear of the unknown, but there's also the excitement of what can be, you know, so just keep going. And if anybody who's watching, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if I have a second degree contact for you that I can introduce you to, or just to get to know me, that's fine. I've kind of have flipped my head on that. You know, I used to only care about oil and gas people because that was my industry. And now I'm open to, I learn from that. And so if I can be of help to anybody, you know, please reach out to me.
That's awesome.
Same for me too, Kyle. Same.
Likewise, yep.
That's great. Well, I will share that when I post the recording. I'll share everyone's or LinkedIn profile anyway, so that people can connect with you guys. But thank you all again very, very much for your time. I'm grateful to know and have you guys in my network. And if there's anything at all I can be doing for you, please let me know.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you guys again.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.